Hey, I'm Stephen Biggs. Welcome to my garden here in Toronto. One of my passions is growing things that aren't supposed to grow here in Toronto, like olives and figs and citrus. But the other thing that I love doing is making the edible garden really ornamental. So weaving together texture, color, form to make a food garden really beautiful. Okay, welcome to my garden. And this is my garden that I have closest to the back of my house. Right here, we're looking at bronze fennel. And it's not that I eat that much fennel. At this point, I've left it all because it's so beautiful. But it makes a great garnish when you pick these fronds. They're a beautiful edible garnish. And then you get the seeds too, which are edible. We've got sorghum, broomcorn. And I grew this strictly as an ornamental to add some height and texture into the garden. But this is eaten in some places. I have a neighbor from South Africa who was telling me that her dad used to make beer from the sorghum. Scarlet runner beans. So here's something that's edible. You've got the edible flowers, you've got the edible beans, but I wanted something colorful because this spot here, I look out my back window from my dining room table. I wanted color, and to my delight this year, this is attracting hummingbirds. So we're getting a lot of hummingbirds coming to the scarlet runner beans. Here's one that I should have picked. It'll be a bit tough at this point, but if you pick the potted beans when they're smaller, this size, even a little bit bigger, then they're nice and tender and they make a nice green bean. Now, at this point, there's no string in there. Sometimes you get beans that get a little bit stringy as they get bigger. These are beautiful. Now here is a fig tree. I've had this one here at least a dozen years. I keep it to about 8 feet because why grow it any taller if you can't pick the figs? Then the birds get them. So about 8 feet. And the fig isn't winter hardy here in Toronto, but the roots will survive because your soil temperature doesn't go up and down as much as the air temperature. So what I do with this is I actually tie together the branches and then I tip this plant over for the winter. So you can see on here, these are lots of little figs coming along, and these will ripen in September at some point. So if we look over here at my driveway, we'll see potted fig trees. And these all go into my garage for the winter. I keep the garage just above freezing and the car never goes in the garage. Those are olive trees. I do get olives here in Toronto, not to give the impression I get a huge harvest. It's kind of small, but it's a fun addition to the garden because back to this idea of the garden being both an ornamental and a productive space. I had limitations where I could plant apples on my property because a neighbor has a big black walnut tree and they give off a compound that kills apples. So when I first moved here, I planted hundreds of dollars worth of apples thinking they were out of reach of that walnut tree, but they all died. So that left me this little nub of fence here for playing with apple trees. So I've got 3 apples that I've espaliered along the fence here. So here, I've got a beautiful English dessert apple. This is one called Strawberry Pippin. You won't find this for sale anywhere. Down here is an apple that I think I need to harvest today. And this is a variety called Liberty, which is very disease resistant. Well, let's see, what do we have in here? I've got a few beets left, some Swiss chard, and here's a staple in my garden that I should talk about. This is leaf celery. And I'll pick a leaf here, and you'll see that it has these smaller stems, but if you're after a celery flavor, it has that same beautiful taste as stalk celery, but it's much easier to grow. You don't have to coddle it. You don't have to, often with celery, they'll blanch it. They'll enclose those stalks so that they're nice and light. With this, there's none of that. And this lasts in the garden very nicely in the fall, right till you get a hard freeze. I'll chop it up for soups and salads. So leaf celery, favorite of mine. If we look over here, I've let a couple of my lettuce plants go to seed. You don't have the little balls, fluff balls with lettuce seeds yet, but they'll float all over, and I will pick some and scatter them just to speed up the process.
Question. If you're making a salad, how do you go? Do you just come out here and choose ingredients?
Yeah. There's different ways you can garden, and a lot of people might think of the traditional farm garden where you have big rows of everything and it's grown for, you know, big harvests and preserving, freezing, canning. But the other way to think about gardening in a home garden setting is more of a grazing garden where you're not growing huge quantities of any one thing, but you can go through the garden and you can pick a few pea tendrils to garnish with, a little bit of bronze fennel, a few flowers that are edible. And I think that's a great way to do it. So back to your question, when I'm coming out to make a salad, there's, you know, what is ready, and then there's that whole creative aspect of, wow, what can I throw together that looks nice, that will taste nice together. Talking still about salads, a lot of people know that you can eat beet leaves, and much like Swiss chard, they're closely related. This variety, this is called bull's blood, and you can see the exquisite dark color of these leaves, and at this point they're bigger, you'd want to cook them, but if you pick them when they're really small, it's a beautiful little deep red leaf to add to a green salad. I get lots of things self-seeding in this garden, so if we look here under my kohlrabi, we've got some savory. Here it is here. I always let some make seeds, so seeds grow everywhere. So as the gardener, you're as much the curator as anything else, because you're going through here deciding what stays and what goes. Magenta spreen. This is a very aggressive self-seeder, so I'm careful not to let much of it go to seed. Fun if you have kids, because you can see there's this magenta colored center, and if you rub that on your skin, it's almost like makeup for kids. So if you're doing gardening with kids, get some magenta spreen. This is the kaffir or magroot lime, and with this, if you do see it for sale, it's often the leaves, and these are the leaves that are used to make green curry. This is a sudachi, which is a small citrus. It's for the juice and the rind that you're growing this. So it's got an intensely fragrant, almost floral rind to it, and a very tangy juice. This is the back garden. First of all, this is very low ground, so in the spring it's very wet. It's sopping wet. So that is the reason that I built these raised beds here. You can see with the wicking bed, so there's a reservoir underneath the soil. And the way it works is that the water wicks upwards into the soil from below. So here's a fill tube. I can put the hose in here. I fill up the reservoir, and that soil stays uniformly moist. The water is wicking upwards. And this is great. I found if we go away in the summer, I can fill this up and go away for 1 or 2 weeks, and those tomato plants are fine. There's lots of different ways you can support tomatoes. In this case, I've made an A-frame. So it's a really simple A-frame, bamboo, zip ties, wire mesh, and this allows me to grow my tomatoes up the side. And then you can plant things underneath if you want. And you can see here basil growing underneath. So something that will do okay in less sunlight. So whether that's basil, whether that's a leafy green like lettuce or spinach, that's what you would grow underneath. So pawpaw trees. This is a really fun fruit to grow. It's a native North American species. You almost never see the fruit for sale because it's not grown on a commercial scale, but it's also very delicate, so it doesn't ship well. So to me, that makes it all the more reason to grow it at home. And I've got fruit here to show you. Again, like my apples, I've netted it because we've had some aggressive squirrels. Not netted, but bagged it. And but you can see them under there. So those are pawpaw fruit. Here's the big veggie patch in the back. I said earlier that this is low-lying ground, so I've made this into raised beds. So I don't like framing something with wood for the aesthetics, but I also find it's easy to reconfigure when it's just an earthen side. So I changed this around. I try to add flowers into my vegetable garden for aesthetics, also to bring in pollinators. So you can see here, we've got dahlias, we've got nasturtiums, and big fan of having cut flowers mixed in with the vegetables. These peas are done. I'm just leaving them to grab a few of the seeds off of them, but I wanted to show you that once again, I'm using this very simple construction with wire mesh, bamboo poles, and zip ties to create this A-frame for the gardens. You know, leeks, they're not really a glamorous plant, but I think they have such a place in a home edible garden because you can pick these midwinter. Leeks will survive through the cold, you can pick them in the fall, but even in a January thaw, when you come out to your garden, those leeks will still be fine for cooking. And you might get a little bit of tip dye back, but the central shank of that leek is great. I'm a big fan of self-seeding crops, so I always leave poppies to self-seed in my veggie garden. These are the seed heads here. I'm not sure. Yeah, there we go. So if I want poppies next year, I will have poppies next year.
Is poppies difficult to grow?
Easy, easy. Just scatter the seed. Here's a patch of carrots, and I've got different patches here and there. One here, that's a red carrot, I think, purple maybe. I've got yellow carrots there. I've got some orange carrots somewhere. And if you're looking at this, you might notice that my carrots are not in rows. So you can grow in rows, there's nothing wrong with that, but in a home backyard, if space is limited, don't be afraid to just grow in a block like this, and then as those little carrot seedlings come up, you'll be thinning them out, eating the baby carrots, making space for those other carrots to grow, the ones that you leave behind. Just the tail end of the gladiolus. I love these as a cut flower, so I always work some into the veggie garden. We've got some of these little teddy bear sunflowers, beautiful little sunflowers. A vegetable garden could be entirely functional, but if you like the creative aspect of gardening too, I'd encourage you to think about the vegetable garden as somewhere where you can, you know, play with color, texture, height, shape, form, and it can be a lot of fun. Okay, these are Celtis. This is my first year growing this. And so in this case, these are past eating, by the way. I've just left them to get seed. But you've got this nice stem, you peel it and then chop it up and you can stir fry it. These are fun for kids and adults. The cucamelon, also known as Mexican sour gherkin or mouse melon, small cucumber relative. They look like little tiny watermelons, crunchy like cucumbers. My kids loved these when they were little, and they'd put them in the lunchbox, take them to school, show all their friends. So a really good, fun, easy to grow crop. We talked about fruit, but if you're looking for something really simple, I'm a big fan of blackberries because there's lots of them. Even if the wildlife makes off with a couple, you'll still get lots. And so here we've got lots of blackberries coming on. Okay, welcome to my front yard. And when we moved here, this was all lawn. You can see today it's a perennial garden, but when this first started, this was a veggie garden. It's changed over time. There are some edible things in here still. The cardoon has edible leaf stalks. You can eat the rose petals, rose petal jelly, or you could make, say, a rose hip vodka. We've got Nanking cherry bush, we've got Saskatoon bush over there. So we do have some edible things that are dotted throughout this garden, but today mainly it's about the color, it's about the flowers, and also about meeting neighbors. A front yard garden is such a tremendous way to meet neighbors because every time I come out here to garden, I end up going back in the house and I'll say to my wife, Shelley, you know, I didn't get as much done as I wanted because so-and-so stopped by to chat.
We'll do them. Would you encourage other people to?
Yes. Make your front yard garden before you make your backyard garden because it's the best way to meet neighbors.
And that's Steven's garden tour. I'm also Steve. I was the guy behind the camera and I'm actually editing the video. This is my YouTube channel. I met Steven a few years ago when I took his in-person gardening course. He's an awesome guy and a great teacher. I've actually since bought some of his books, like this one, Growing Lemons Where You Think You Can't. Steven also has a podcast and offers a bunch of gardening courses. I might take his Growing Figs course because, of course, he wouldn't let me leave without taking a fig plant, which is great. I'm potting it this weekend. I'll link to his books, podcast, and gardening podcast in the video description. Hopefully that was an interesting tour. I definitely came away with some new ideas for my garden. I'm gonna try self-seeding. I wanna grow poppies. And I think my kids would really dig the makeup plant. Hopefully you came away with a few ideas too. But in any case, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.